Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I might have actually interviewed most of you probably as you were coming into your PME program, so you're very welcome. And the faculty and students in the back too. So as Anne mentioned, I was here for 3 years, and I'm now at the University of Northern Colorado in beautiful, lovely smelling Greeley, Colorado. You can Google it and see what I mean by the lovely smell. While I was here, I applied for some funding through the Society of Health and Physical Educators in the United States, SHAPE America, and received funding to actually look at whole school physical activity programs in 3 different countries. And so I looked at a school here, a secondary school here. I went to Finland for about 10 days and spent a few days in a school there, high school there, and then also in the United States in Arizona. So I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about the whole school physical activity program concept, and then I'll give you some information on the research that I've done, and quite kind of timely as far as different things that are happening, especially at the secondary school in Ireland with respect to physical activity and physical education. And like Anne said, please interject at any time if I'm talking about anything that you'd like to know more about. So this notion of whole school physical activity programming is not new. I'd say that probably within the last 10 years, people have been speaking a bit more about it. And actually calling it something or naming it. And so the Institute of Medicine, which is an organization out of the United States, defines it this way. So physical education, classroom activity breaks, recess break times, school sport programs, active transport, and then before and after school programs. And the World Health Organization would have a very similar kind of definition of basically the school as being the center of a child's life or a young person's life and having the ability to really promote physical activity, obviously within physical education, but beyond the kind of 4 walls of the sports hall as well. So that's kind of sets the context for what we're talking about. And within the United States, this would be commonly referred to as a comprehensive school physical activity program, or a CSPAP, so you might hear me say that. And really the whole goal is to get kids towards that 60 minutes of physical activity daily. The school, in most places in the world, has really been asked to only contribute about 30 minutes of physical activity to kids, their daily recommendation of 60. But we really believe that through all of these avenues, we can actually get kids to the 60 minutes. Physical education alone really can't do that. Just because of the provision in most places, actually in most countries in the world. And as you all know, in Ireland, without sometimes the requirements and things, some kids don't get any physical activity throughout the day. So we can't just rely on physical education to get kids to that 60 minutes. We need some of these other things as well. And of course, physical education as a well-rounded subject really should be more than just physical activity. So even if you were to have an hour of physical education every day, you'd expect that there would be other things occurring, education, for example, that wouldn't necessarily apply to the 60 minutes of physical activity. So the basis kind of for why I became interested in this, when I moved over here, I had been originally from Canada, but I've been living and working in the United States for a number of years. And, I think when we're living somewhere, we become very focused on what's happening locally. We don't necessarily think about what's happening in the rest of the world. And I was pleasantly surprised when I came to Ireland and I realized that there was this thing called the Active School Flag. You've all heard of the Active School Flag. And that it was this program that was doing essentially what Shape America was trying to do in the United States around comprehensive school physical activity programming. And so it got me sort of thinking about this idea of what are other countries doing to promote physical activity in schools for young people. And so I embarked upon writing a paper with another colleague here in Ireland at Mary Immaculate, a colleague in Finland, a colleague in Poland, and then back in the United States, about this idea of what's happening in countries for kids in schools to be physically active. So we wrote a paper, it was published in Quest, and probably one of the most exciting things that ever happened to me, and I thought it was a prank call, and someone called me from the Guardian newspaper in the UK and said, we've picked up your paper, we'd like to know what's happening. And so I connected them with the authors, and they wrote a really nice piece kind of misrepresented some of the things we talked about, but wrote a really nice piece on this idea of what's happening in other countries to get kids active. Painted the UK very poorly, which I felt bad about. But they highlighted some of the things that were happening, for example, in Canada, in Finland, in the United States. So that was a really kind of nice piece and made me really realize that people are actually care about this stuff and are kind of interested in what's happening. Because generally as academics, we don't really hear from people from the Guardian newspaper asking about our work, so that was a nice thing to know. And so one of the things that we highlighted in the paper was this idea of different initiatives that occur in countries to do with physical activity promotion. And all of them do have a physical education component, so while I'm going to be talking about these as physical activity programs or initiatives, I just want to highlight that for each of them, quality physical education really is kind of the cornerstone or the most important part. Without that, it's really hard to have a comprehensive school physical activity program if students in the school are not being properly physically educated. So here in Ireland, the Active School Flag is the known program. In Finland, it's Finnish Schools on the Move, or the Finnish word that maybe Kwok can pronounce for me, but I try sometimes and it comes out funny. So we'll just call it Finnish Schools on the Move. And then in the United States, Let's Move Active Schools is the initiative, or was at the time. I'll talk a little bit about the transition of that. So the Active School Flag, how many of you driving around have seen this flag in the middle flying outside of some schools? A few of you. So the Active School Flag is actually a flag. That was kind of fun to find out. It's not just a name. And it is a program that was basically developed and funded by the Department of Education and Skills. Some of that I think has changed over the years, but at the time that this work was done. And it was managed by the Active School Flag National Steering Committee, which as I understand is actually I think 2 people potentially. And some of that I think has changed. There's been, with the Healthy Ireland funding and things, there's been a lot more attention on the Active School Flag. So some of this has changed probably since I did the work. But basically there was a few different provisions that were required for people to obtain the Active School Flag. They had to adhere to the Department of Education and Skills guidelines regarding PE provision. And this was a major stumbling block for a lot of schools in actually applying for or achieving the flag, because a lot of schools wanted it and thought they could get it, but they weren't actually adhering to the provisions for physical education. So in a way this was good because it really forced that core piece of quality physical education. Not saying that just because you have the provision it's going to be quality, but at least forcing schools to adhere to that provision of making sure they had the proper amount of physical education in schools. They were supposed to teach a broad and balanced PE curriculum, inform and invite the whole school community to participate in the Active School Flag process. And this is something that's common across all 3 countries, this idea of kind of a committee that includes not only the teachers who are leading it, but parents, community members, other teachers in the school, usually the administrator, and especially, probably most importantly, students within the school to provide that voice. Self-evaluate current provision for PE, physical activity, and community links. This was a really big one, and interestingly, my colleague Deirdre Cronin at Mary Immaculate and I are just analyzing some data on a sustainability project on the Active School Flag, and this idea of self-evaluation was something that was highly cited by our participants as something that was very beneficial for them. Going into it, they kind of sort of all thought, oh, we've got a lot of physical activity, that we're doing a lot of the great things, but then through the self-evaluation they realized, we don't have a lot of opportunities for girls, or, we only have these certain specific sports. We don't provide a wide range or a wide variety. So that's, I think, a very positive thing for schools to do. And then from that self-evaluation, they were asked to plan and implement improvements for PE, physical activity, and community links as kind of the 3 main goals around the initiative. And then lastly, organize an active school week, which I think here happens in the first week of May. And so when have you guys finished your school placement already? Yeah, so you, I guess, wouldn't have been in the schools in May, but that's a really nice week to kind of highlight the things that we're doing in physical education and physical activity. So those were the things at the time that you had to do, adhere to get the flag. And really the key features, as I mentioned, the committee, the self-evaluation, but the big piece here is that schools actually had to show evidence. So they had to provide evidence that they had the PE provision, that they had a balanced PE curriculum, or they had to provide evidence of the improvements that they planned to make before they could be awarded the flag. The flag was valid for 3 years, after which schools then have to reapply. So it's not something that you just get and can keep forever. You have to continue to show that you are still an active school. And then the schools get this physical flag to fly in front of their building. And I think for those of us in the room that care about physical activity and physical education for young people, this is a really big thing, because this is a school saying, we value this. This is part of our culture. We value having an active school culture. And just as much as potentially the green flag to show that you value recycling and environmental sustainability, flying a flag to kind of really represent what your school values is a really big thing, I think. So some of the best practices, and again, this is kind of coming from that paper that I showed you earlier, the Quest paper. The self-evaluation process is something that is kind of unparalleled in other countries. I think one of the benefits of being in a small-ish country is that you really can have those accountability measures, because there's not millions and millions of schools applying for this. So they can send inspectors out to the schools to make sure that these things are actually happening. There is evidence through research that it does result in better physical activity provision for schools. So schools do make meaningful changes to their physical activity and physical education offerings as a result of the active school flag process. And then again, as I've mentioned a couple of times, the actual awarding of the flag. And if you ever get the chance to be at a school when they get their active school flag, it's quite a spectacle. I got to, the last year I was here, be part of a ceremony, and they invited local sports stars, and the media was there, and the whole school was out in front, and they did this kind of flag raising ceremony, and it was really quite lovely to see this celebration of physical activity that you don't often see in, especially for example, secondary schools, which is where I was. Some of the development opportunities, I just mentioned a secondary school, but more engagement from secondary schools. This seemed to be something that a lot more primary schools were applying for and receiving. And I actually just found out there is a project ongoing now through Healthy Ireland to look at how we can get more engagement from secondary schools, which is really exciting. And then the level of support, so funding, resources, advice from experts, a platform for an exchange of ideas. Those are some things that were kind of lacking from the process. They did all of this work, schools did, to prove that they were doing this, but then there wasn't a lot of kind of support or resources provided. And I think that that's a challenge in schools in general, no matter what you're doing or what your initiative. So that's the active school flag process. Yeah?
Is there any idea why secondary schools aren't taking it?
Yeah. I have some of my own, but also, I think the PE provision is a huge one. I think less secondary schools adhere to the PE provision for whatever reason. But I think that the initial process was developed as kind of a one-size-fits-all program. And as we all know, secondary schools are very unique in the way that they function, a lot more so than potentially primary schools. And so I think for primary schools, it was a lot simpler. The schools were oftentimes smaller, and teachers could kind of collaborate more. And secondary schools, to be honest, I think have more going on as far as different initiatives that they're willing to support. And so, I can't say for certain, but I would say that it had something to do kind of with the what I mentioned before about kind of the things that you had to do to get the flag were more complex for secondary schools.
I just think it's really interesting that we only have specialist physical educators in secondary school, and we actually have more uptake in primary school where we don't have the specialists.
Yeah, and part of that could be that, there is, at the primary school level, maybe because they don't have physical education specialists, they feel like they need to compensate in some ways. So that could be, but again, that's anecdotal. I'm not based on anything. So Finished Schools on the Move then is a really exciting project that started in, I want to say, about 2010-ish. And so It's very similar. The aim of this Finnish School on the Move program was to establish a physically active culture in Finnish comprehensive schools, which is grades 1 through 9. And here that would be the equivalent of essentially primary school up until kind of the transition year would be the equivalent of that. It's funded by the Ministry of Education and Culture, and I really should say funded because, in air quotes, because there wasn't a lot of funding provided for the program, similar to Active School Flag in Ireland. And so while it was something that was brought forth by the government, again, there wasn't a lot of resources for schools participating. One of the things that I love the most about the Finnish Schools on the Move program, and I talk about wherever I go, is this idea that their whole plan was really to make the school day more pleasant through physical activity. And I'm just going to say that again because I think it's so amazing. To make the school day more pleasant through physical activity. And this was for all kids, for students, for teachers, and that's, for those of us that like to engage in physical activity, I think that's a really exciting thing that a whole country said, let's create this program because we know that the school day can be better if we can get kids physically active. So some of the sample activities that they suggested schools using were activity-based methods during academic classes, so things like movement integration into academics or activity breaks. They develop facilities and schoolyards that encourage physical activity participation, and you'll see that directly in the study I'm going to talk about. And then also promoting a physically active school commute, which I'm going to show you a few pictures of schoolyards, bike racks, particularly in Finland, to illustrate that point. I don't know that that's something that they actually needed to work on based on the school that I visited, but we'll talk about that in a second. The really cool thing about the Finnish Schools on the Move program is that it was really a bottom-up, self-directed approach. So they were given options of things that they could do, but they could really choose based on what their needs were within the school, what they were going to implement to create this physically active school culture. And schools could apply for funding, and there was several pilot schools that were included, I think 2010 to 2012, that became part of this Finnish Schools on the Move network. And I would say, other than potentially an initiative in Canada called Action Schools BC in British Columbia, Finnish Schools on the Move has probably the biggest evidence base around research that's actually been done on the initiative in schools, and that's continuing to come out. It has shown that it's led to lasting change, and we'll talk about that in a second. The school that was part of my project that I'm going to talk about was part of this initial Schools on the Move network. They received funding during the initial years of the program. Some of the opportunities for development, again, access to additional resources. These things are common across all of the initiatives, involving the entire school staff in the program, so that committee piece, and then more engagement from secondary schools. So you'll hear that quite a bit. The United States program was Let's Move Active Schools. This has gone through a few different versions and actually just changed again this year. So it originated from this program called Let's Move in School. And if you remember, the United States used to have this great president called Barack Obama. And his wife, Michelle Obama, it seems like ages ago now, but his wife, Michelle Obama, created her initiative basically when she was in the White House for the whole 8 years was to get kids to be more healthy, right? So more physically active and nutrition choices. And so she created the Let's Move campaign or initiative. And so at the time, AFERD, which is now SHAPE, the Society of Health and Physical Educators, attached onto that, and they created what was called Let's Move in School. After a few years of realizing that they should probably just partner directly with the White House and the organizations supporting that, it became Let's Move Active Schools. So a branch of Michelle Obama's campaign to get kids to be more healthy. And you'll notice the same components are still here from the Comprehensive School Physical Activity Program or whole of school, with physical education really being the shining star. So again, acknowledging that none of this is possible without quality physical education. The aim was really to help children achieve physical activity recommendations by making physical education and physical activity a priority at school. One thing I want to highlight, because I think it's important, is if you notice the Irish aim and the United States aim is all about actually accumulating the amount of physical activity, whereas the Finnish program was really about making the school day more pleasant through physical activity. And I think that that's a key difference that we need to sometimes think about. We oftentimes, I think, focus on the product or that 60 minutes without thinking about what it's actually going to do to improve children's lives. So I just wanted to highlight that as something I think is important. This program was endorsed by the federal government. I say endorsed, there wasn't a lot of funding again for it. And it did have the support of several organizations. So SHAPE, as I mentioned, which is the Society of Health and Physical Educators. You've all probably heard of Nike. And then the President's Council on Fitness, and a bunch of others. There's, if you go to the Active Schools page, there's like 100 different organizations listed. Very excitingly for me, the University of Northern Colorado, where I am now, it was just announced 2 weeks ago that we are one of only 2 official university partners of this national initiative now. So that's really exciting for us. And the program is actually now just called Active Schools. So they've dropped the Let's Move entirely, partly because of the shift, I think, in the government. But now the initiative is just called Active Schools, and there's a bunch of different partners. And like I said, UNC is now one of them, which is really exciting for us. Some of the key features, enrollment is web-based, so it was all done online, and actually that's what the Active School flag has shifted to now in Ireland, is this idea of a web-based enrollment versus these massive portfolios that they used to have to submit prior to. A school champion must be designated, and we'll talk about this in relation to the findings that I have around this idea of making sure that there was a leader in schools. Schools set target goals and then they made plans to achieve these. So very similar to some of the things you saw, especially in the Irish program, where they were supposed to make improvements based on what was happening in their schools. There were support and resources offered, some at a cost. So there were some things on the website that were free for schools. That's mostly planning resources, but there were things like a physical activity leader training that the national organization was offering that was quite a cost, though, really, to get a school champion changed. And this is new, and it's now changed to just the Active Schools Award. But schools, I think as of 2015 or 16, could actually apply for a Let's Move Active Schools Award. So that, in that case, they did have to provide a lot more evidence that they were doing these things, and actually be awarded as an active school, which again kind of parallels the Finnish Schools on the Move network and the Active School flag, the awarding of the Active School flag. So some of the best practices, this really was accessible to all schools in the United States because of the fact that it was web-based enrollment, and really all it took was one person from a school to say, I want to do this, I value this. Anyone could really access it. The website was well developed and it included many high quality resources, again partly because of the partners. As you saw, Nike and those things, they have a lot of money, and so they can develop really nice shiny glossy resources. And then there was information provided to registered schools about professional development and grant opportunities and things like that. Again, you've seen most of these already, but I want to highlight again this idea of more engagement from secondary schools. The other piece, and I have a question mark next to it, is this idea of a definition of quality physical education. So in order to register as a school, you had to designate that you were providing quality physical education. And I think globally, there's still kind of an argument on kind of what the definition of quality physical education is. In Ireland, it came down to the provision and kind of a well-balanced curriculum. But this was less clear with the Let's Move Active Schools process about what this sort of actually looked like. Someone could say, yes, this is happening in our school, and there wasn't as much of a definition, I guess, provided for that. So the common area for development, if you haven't gotten that yet, is this idea of engagement from secondary schools. So across the 3 countries, this was something that when the experts from even Poland, who is not involved in this study, but we all kind of said as we were talking about the things that need to improve with respect to physical activity promotion, was this idea in secondary schools there wasn't a lot of uptake of these initiatives. And so I sort of got thinking, and as someone who was a high school physical education teacher, and that's my area of interest, what can we do to kind of get secondary schools to be more on board with this, and what are secondary schools that are doing this actually doing that's working for them? So the purpose then of the study that I did in the 3 different countries was to investigate across international contexts best practices of secondary schools that have been identified as active schools. I would be totally defeating the purpose of what I'm talking about if I continued to let you all sit there looking tired. So let's go ahead and get up and do a little activity break. Okay, so let's go ahead and stand. You can put your stuff down where you are. And what I would like us to do is to find someone next to you. Hopefully, I don't know if you can all see me anymore, but find someone next to you, and we're going to just do a couple rounds of active rock, paper, scissors. Okay, so does everyone know what I'm talking about? Okay, so our rock, if you can show me, our rock is actually going to be down like this. So everybody crouch down, show me your rock. Show me your rock position, okay? And your paper is going to be up wide in like a star jump position, and your scissors is actually going to be this way, okay? So what you're going to do with your partner, can I borrow you for a second? So me and my partner, what we're going to do, we're going to jump 3 times, and then after we jump 3 times, we're going to show. So we'll just jump up and down. So 1, 2, 3. Oh, after 3, 3, and then show. Okay, so ready? Yep. 1, 2, 3. Show. Okay, so we're both rock, so we'll go again. Okay, and again, paper beats rock, rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper. Okay, so 3 times jump with your partner. You can go in a group of 3 if you need to. Okay. You beat him. Okay. You're gonna get real low for that rock, girl. Go for it. Okay, find somebody else to play. Find somebody else to play. One more person. Go best out of 3 and then have a seat. You got the good squat there. I like it. Okay, go ahead and have a seat. Have a seat. Oh, tiebreaker, tiebreaker. Got it.
Get back from 2-0 down.
Okay, so again, that's just an example of something that potentially you could do in a classroom to help encourage more physical activity. My colleagues at Mary I and I, when I was here, we actually did a project called Moving to Learn Ireland and have some work coming out about that. And it was really all about integrating movement into the classroom for Irish teachers. And the active rock, paper, scissors was actually one of the children in Ireland's favorite ones to do. So. And they used to call it the American game when I was in there, and I was like, I'm Canadian. But anyways, so again, so the purpose of this really was to, was to investigate across international contexts best practices of secondary schools that would identify as active schools. And how I identified these schools was partly based on some of the work that I had done in schools, but through different networks I had. So I had colleagues who worked with me on that paper from Liikes, which is a research center attached to the University of Jyväskylä in Finland. And they were able to identify a school there who, like I said, was part of that original Finnish Schools on the Move network. And so that's how I found that school and got into that school. The school here I was connected with through the coordinator of the Active School Flag process in Ireland, and they were a school that was about to get their flag when I contacted them about being involved in the study. And the school in the United States was a school that I had actually worked with when I was there for my dissertation work, who I knew basically based on being there that they were doing a lot of great things as a secondary school to get kids to be more active, and they were also engaged in Let's Move Active Schools process, so they had applied for that program. So that's kind of how I started. And the rationale was really that if we could understand the impact of contextual factors and comparing best practices relative to the implementation of whole school approaches to physical activity promotion, it could really positively impact not only the literature but practices in schools internationally. And what you'll notice is that there's not a lot of differences, and I was actually really shocked because I've spent quite a bit of time in high schools, well in Canada growing up and in the United States working, and I had spent quite a bit of time during my 3 years here in secondary schools here, and you know, high school kids, teenagers are the same no matter where you are in the world. And when I went to Finland, I think we all internationally have this vision of Finland schools, right? Because of how well they do academically and things. And I mean, I could have been in, like a school down the road here, and they look the same. It's still on breaks, on their phones, sitting in the corridor and not talking to each other, and so they're the same. Teenagers are the same no matter where you are in the world. So I really believe that we can be well served by kind of looking outside of our direct context to find out what other people are doing and learn from it to improve our own practices. This work was really based around the conceptual framework for a comprehensive school physical activity program by Carson and his colleagues that really focuses on the daily physical activity of the child. There's a little stick figure child behind there as kind of the epicenter of what we're focusing on. And all of these other kind of layers that impact that. So on the outside here you see the culture, so policy and kind of normative and behavioral beliefs. If we think about a school, what is sort of the norm of a school? What you all are doing right now, right? Sitting in desks or chairs, listening to someone speak. And so that's kind of the culture piece that we're trying to break. And that policy impacts that greatly. Then on the gray, the inner layer, we've got leaders. So that's your champion, your school-based champion or leader, the committee, and then the supportive administration is in this area as well. And then you've got your facilitators, things like resources, which we've learned, right, from the 3 countries that there's not a lot of. The facilitators, so the teachers, skills, dispositions, and then actually safety was one of those things as well, because unfortunately we still live in a society where people are afraid that if we do too much activity and things that there's a safety concern. And then right on the outside of the actual student are those CISBAP components. So our physical activity during school, staff involvement, community engagement, physical education, and then physical activity before and after school. So this was kind of formed the basis of the work that I was doing. I really wanted to look at as many of these potential factors that were impacting children's, young people's physical activity levels as possible. So how I went about doing that, I probably should have put this slide next, but I spent 3 days in the 3 different schools, so 3 days each, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, across 3 different weeks in the spring of, gosh, what was my last year here, 2016 maybe, and I went to the United States for 3 weeks, to Arizona in March. It was lovely. Go if you ever have a chance. And spent 3 days here, I think the first week of April, and then 3 days in May in Finland. And I wanted to spend kind of a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because I think sometimes Mondays and Fridays have sort of outliers. There's different things going on, or half days. And I wanted it to be sort of 3 typical school days. And I'll talk a little bit more about the methods in a second, but I want to highlight the schools first. The United States school was about 2,000 students from grades 9 through 12, which is approximately 14 to 18 years old. That's a secondary school or a high school in the United States. It was located in an upper middle class neighborhood, and actually most of the students from quite a small radius around the school. So I would say that that was representative of the demographic of the school. As you can see, I mean, the facilities at this school rival some professional sporting facilities that we would see, for example, here in Ireland. And these are that's actually just one of their 8 fields that they have. So this is a AstroTurf pitch that is only for the football team at the school. They actually, unlike most schools in the United States, this school does allow the physical education program to use the AstroTurf, which when I taught at a high school in the United States, we were not allowed on the turf at all. So $1 million for a team of 60 teenagers. But this school actually had a very different culture and were very welcoming and open. But there were, all around this, there was 2 practice football fields, American football, a practice softball field and a practice baseball field. They have different dimensions, so 2 different ones, and a competition baseball field and a competition softball field. They had a whole area for their track and field. I mean, the sport facilities on the school were probably about 10 times the size of the actual school building. So we're talking a lot of different opportunities for young people to be physically active. For my friend Brigitte here, I included a picture of the dance studio or the dance room, which was, again, world class. Sorry about the moaning in the back. The school in Ireland was about 600 students. It was grades 1st year through 6th year, so approximately 13 to 19 years old. You probably, some of you might recognize it. It's a free charging boarding and day school. And they actually also had very nice facilities. They had an all-weather pitch, access to a rugby pitch, a nice sized sports hall, and some other things on the grounds that we'll see in a second. And the school in Finland was approximately 580 students, grades 7 through 9. So that's about 13 to 16 years old. They call it lower secondary school there, so very similar to kind of 1st through 3rd year here, or up to transition year. Located in a middle class neighborhood. I found in Finland, and Kwok can correct me if I'm wrong, but because of the kind of social system there, most of the neighborhoods are very similar. There's not kind of a big difference with respect to socioeconomic status. And here's some of the photos from that school. Their sports hall was like one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And I don't know if you can tell, but they actually had these like invisible like nets that would separate it. So it could be a big sports hall, or they had 3 individual courts that you could separate. And there was an additional curtain that could fall actually if you didn't want to be able to see between the courts. So it was really, really kind of cool. Obviously, you'll notice a big difference in the amount of students in the United States school versus the other 2. So I think that's just even more credit to the school in Finland and Ireland for what they were able to offer students. So as I mentioned, I spent 3 typical school days in each school. I spent from approximately 30 minutes before the school day started until 30 minutes after the school day ended. So that's the first bell in the morning and the first bell, or the last bell of the day. At the school, really just kind of observing what was happening. And my purpose was to really see what were young people doing, what were teachers doing, what facilities were accessible to kids during the day, what did they do during break times. All of those things I was kind of paying attention to and taking field notes from that. I took a lot of photos of what I determined to be spaces in the school that kids could be physically for young people to be physically active. And I did interviews with key stakeholders, and this was probably the most interesting part. I didn't just focus on teachers. I interviewed, as you can see, a lot of students, the principal at each school, and then also parents and community members in all 3 countries. I Given the fact that for the most part I was relying on the kindness of people in those schools to facilitate setting these things up for the researchers in the room, it was a lot to try to get people in focus groups during those 3 days that I was there. And so I was quite pleased with the amount of people that I was able to talk to in each of the different settings, especially the students. They were kind of some of the most fun and the most honest. Yeah, Anne?
Are the teachers physical education teachers?
No, so I purposefully, actually thank you for the question, I purposely did not include the physical education teacher because I would expect that most physical education teachers are going to tell you what exactly you want to hear, that like this is what should happen in schools and this is what is happening, and I wanted it to be teachers who, I actually even tried to not get teachers who were even coaches in schools. I wanted classroom teachers, kind of the general public of the school to really get their ideas about what was happening in the school relative to physical activity provision. So great question, thanks. So this is really, you won't care as much about, but I did inductive analysis really to look at different themes that were associated with what I determined as being best practices that align kind of with some of the literature. So I did analysis of the entire, so my field notes, all of the pictures, all of the interviews for each school individually, and found themes within all of that for each school. And then I compared the themes that I had from Ireland, from Finland, from the United States. And I guess I have to be careful because I know that one school in Ireland doesn't encompass all of Ireland in one school in the United States. I'm just referring to those so that you know which school I'm talking about. But obviously there's lots of different schools within a country that have different contexts. But I looked at things from within each school that were common. And I came up with 3 common themes that I really saw at all 3 schools. An established school-based leader, strong support from the school community. I'll come back to why moral is in parentheses there. And then many available physical activity opportunities. So these were the 3 things that it didn't matter which school I was in which country. I saw all of these things very clearly throughout my time there. So the first one was a school-based leader. The United States program would call this a physical activity leader or a champion. In Ireland, it's the active school flag coordinator for the school or lead. This was very evident in all 3 countries or in all 3 schools, that there was basically one person who kind of led the charge when it came to promoting physical activity. And this was identified not only by the teachers, the other teachers in the school, but parents and community members were able to identify this person, the principal spoke of this person, and the students identified this person in each school by name. And in all 3 schools, not surprisingly probably, but the person was a PE teacher who was kind of identified as this physical activity leader. So Tyler, who was a school counselor in the United States, and I've used pseudonyms for all of the participants, but he was talking about Jeff, that he's the chair of the PE department, and he's very passionate about what he does. And sometimes you get a bad seed in the PE department and they just roll balls out and read newspapers. Not here, right? That's not this PE, and they take pride in that. Our PE department is just, it's night and day difference, and it all starts with him. It all trickles down. I would say Jeff Holmes would be the guy. And you can imagine, as a former PE teacher and someone who's interested in this, the elation that came over me when I heard someone say this about a PE teacher, because as we know, and unfortunately we operate within a marginalized society, or within schools. Oftentimes the PE teacher is marginalized, and to hear people, and this was one example, but over and over again referring to this person as like a leader in not just physical activity but in the school in general, and that other people kind of look to him for guidance was a really cool thing. Liz, who is a 15-year-old student in Ireland, and again, these are pseudonyms, and some of you will recognize these as people I know, but that's what I do with pseudonyms. I pick people I know. But Miss Masterson, the PE teacher, has done so much since she came here. She was at college last year. She just came from teaching practice when you're like a college student. She came back here to work full-time, and she does like everything. And this was really exciting for me because she was one of our students. So they're talking about someone who graduated from our program, who was at this school in teaching practice and then became a PE teacher there. And while she wasn't the driving force between the for the active school flag process, she walked into this school and started all of these new initiatives. And the students just spoke so highly of her. They had no idea I was her teacher previously, so that was kind of really cool as well. This idea that they were talking about someone that we'd trained here at the best physical education institution in Ireland, right? It's recording, right? Okay, perfect. And so that was really kind of cool to see. This was an exchange between two parents in Finland. So Alma said, yes, I think because Mikko, who is the PE teacher, is also participating in our parents' meetings, and I think he has done a lot to make it possible for children that they should exercise more and so on. I think this school has a good effort for that, especially for this teacher. And Jaakko said, yeah, because he has a positive attitude for that, and he said to maybe the girls and then maybe the boys also that, yeah, let's do this, and come on, let's do something. And so here's two parents coming from outside of the school who are also able to recognize this. And you'll see they said the parents meeting. So this PE teacher had actually implanted himself within the parent committee that internal to the school, and was not only doing this with students, but was also promoting what he was doing with parents, which was really exciting. When asked who was responsible for promoting physical activity in their school, and these were two teachers in Finland, Hannah said, especially Mikko, I think. He's very engaged. And Alina agreed with her and said, yes, Mikko is the promoter of it. So really this idea of like there was no, well, it's kind of everybody's job, which was sort of sad to hear because, you know, we want this to be a committee effort. But in these three schools, there was one person that was identified over and over again across all stakeholder groups as kind of the lead person. The second theme was really around support from the school community. I have moral in parentheses because I think that similar to what we saw from like the national initiatives, while there's support, it's not necessarily physical resources and funding and things. And so I kind of want to qualify that as what I mean by that. But the principal in Finland, Patrick, he said, nowadays I don't need to put too much energy because Finnish Schools on the Move was a project. I said that I am with you if you are with me forever, because for 2 or 3 years we got money from the Ministry of Education. Nowadays we don't, yet we are still doing it. Not so well as we would like to, but we are going to do it forever. I said, I will do my best if you will continue after the project. We just have to have it as just normal life kind of forever. And so this idea of that outer ring we looked at with the model of this culture, changing the school culture, here's a principal saying, yes, I will support this, we'll do this, but I need you to continue it after the funding and I'll continue to support it. And so that was a really kind of nice thing to see. And this idea of just making it normal life in the school, making a physically active culture in the school normal life is something I think that we probably all can agree would be really great to do. This is a bomb shelter. Common in schools in Finland. This is in the basement. And why I have the picture of it here is because this is what it got turned into. So with the support of the principal, there was all these unused spaces in the basement of the school, and the PE teacher went in and he said, well, can I use that? And he said, sure, we have no money. But so with students, they actually built this climbing wall on the weekend. Students came in and helped. He had local businesses donate the flooring and stuff, and they've transformed about 3 or 4 of these bomb shelters into physical activity spaces for kids to use. And so again, this idea of support from the administrators, like if you're going to change a room in a school, you can't just walk in and be like, I'm going to make this room a climbing room and a wrestling room, whatever. So he had that support from his principal to be able to do those things, and the initiative obviously itself as being a leader. That was really cool. I was like, why were you taking me into this room? Like they still have the thing. Usually the door's open. I asked them to close it for the photo because I thought it was more, so I did manipulate the environment a little bit. I shouldn't say that. But it was so cool for me to see like these spaces that were literally just empty kind of rooms in the basement of this school be transformed. Alina, she kind of reiterated what the principal said himself, but she said our principal promotes physical activity. He just offered to order us some standing tables. So this idea that not only was he supportive of this initiative for kids, but he also wanted his whole school community to be physically active, and that's something you might not see very frequently. Susan, who was a parent and community member from the United States, said, I think the school has good programs, good athletic programs. I think a lot of kids are involved. From cross country, I had a daughter in cross country, which is a marvelous team all the way up. My son did wrestling one year and football, and I think the school has great support. I think the parents are a great support in this area and want their kids to be involved in a lot of school sports. That is my take. While she was talking about sports and athletics, you know, she did talk about that there were other things for kids who weren't necessarily as sporty. She talked about a lot of programs that didn't necessarily involve physical activity, but the structure within the United States, school sport is kind of the biggest, for better or for worse, the biggest piece with respect to physical activity promotion. And this school, as you saw by the facilities, has a lot of offerings for kids to be physically active. Miriam is a student in Ireland, and she said, so for TY, you can pick what you want to which course, like enterprise and stuff like that. There's a small group of us who did active school flag, and we kind of were there to kind of improve the school's physical activity, and we set off sports days and walks and stuff. So for TY in this school, one of their offerings that they could actually choose was active school flag. That's what it was called. And so their whole charge as students was to basically promote the goals of active school flag within the school. So they organized walks and sports days and different things, and that was really kind of cool to see this idea of like, you know, real support from an administration that an entire course essentially could be dedicated to this idea of physical activity promotion. They did things around the school. They created slogans. So these were actually slogans from 2 different years. And these posters were up all over the school. So stretch your mind, move your body was their latest slogan of how they were trying to encourage their peers to be physically active. Get active, get involved, get going. And then this says you should be active for an hour a day. So lots of education around the school. These were 2 posters, but there was probably 20 posters all around the school that these kids had put up to promote physical activity, which was really cool. When discussing the schoolyard, this is where I was coming back to earlier. Jaco said, we heard from Miko that the students drew what they wanted when designing the schoolyard. This is a lower secondary school, teenagers. Wow, that's great, and especially because a lot of secondary schools, you wouldn't see that kind of equipment, the swing and different things. Most secondary schools just have nothing outside. They do listen to the kids if they have ideas. So the kids in this lower secondary school, as part of the original rendition of Finished Schools on the Move, actually designed the playground. So they allowed them to take what was a parking lot, actually the aerial picture of the school that I had up earlier, you can see that it was just a parking lot, and they developed this. So you can see in the background here, there's like a little mini stadium, they call it. They have this accessible swing, which was good for anyone, really. They had these balls, they were kind of on like a wobbling thing, and this was like a wobble, or they spun around it, and a balance beam thing, and the gymnastics bars here, and the kids designed that, and they built it with some of the initial funding that they had. And you would not see this, as you know, here especially, or in the United States, you wouldn't see equipment like that at secondary schools, but kids loved it. Did they kind of mostly hang out on it? Yes, but it was there for them to be active and play with if they needed it. All throughout all of the schools, I saw lots of different promotional material on the walls associated with getting kids to be physically active. Posters on, this one's from Finland if you didn't know. And so, you know, I don't know what it says. Can you read it?
Could be it.
Yeah.
Break time, be active during break time.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's what it says. So, and you know, the ones I showed you from Ireland, this was actually on playing with a ball in Finland on the side of the school. So this idea that sport and physical activity was valued in these schools came through to me in what I could see on the walls and things like that. So that was exciting. The last theme then is around physical activity opportunities. The students in Ireland were having a discussion about whether physical activity was valued in their school, and Izzy said, we had the walk the other day, and Miriam said, yeah, a mile walk at lunch. Yeah, we followed the green, this will make sense in a second. And Jaimie said, I was just standing there, and then the teachers came over and said it's a mile walk, and I didn't have any idea what this walk was about. Izzy said they're trying to promote healthiness and getting out and getting fit. So the entire school actually did a walk around at the same time together, and that was really fun. And when they said following the green, so at this school, all around the school yard, it's not a very big yard, especially if you compare it to like the United States. It could probably fit within that AstroTurf field. They had designed with the woodworking teacher and students these men, green men, and they put them all around the school and laid out a walking path so you could tell how far the distance were that you were walking. And so like on the walls, on the trees, like different places all around the perimeter of the school, you could see, you know, you're at 0.21 kilometers. And so it was really kind of a nice thing to see that not only like did they value this, but they were looking for different ways to encourage kids to be physically active. And that was something that was rather new in the about a year since when I was there. Matthew, who is a history teacher in the United States, said, I like the lunchtime thing. I'll tell you what that is in a second. Anytime you see kids off doing something rather than sitting around and doing nothing. I mean, that gym, I've been there many times when it's packed. I mean, you can't even shoot a hoop or play ping pong because there's so much. That maybe isn't a good thing. But I would agree with my colleague that it's pretty awesome. The level at which our kids are bouncing around moving, it's pretty awesome. And he was referring to the Physically Active Coyotes program, or the PAC, which was a lunchtime program that was a partnership with a local university where they came in and the university students, PE majors, actually would basically open the gym and provide supervision, provide equipment for the kids to be physically active. And it really was quite easy to do because they just opened the gym, put on some music, and kids would come down during their lunch hour after they'd finished eating. They had nothing to do, and so they'd be active. And as Matthew said earlier, there was times when it was packed. So I was there for a week. The program was actually on Tuesday and Thursday, so I got to see it. And I mean, there was ranging, I'd say, from like 20 to 80 kids in the gym at any one time, kind of coming and going. And it was so successful through the university partnership that the school, led by Jeff, the PE teacher, actually decided that they wanted to do it all 5 days of the week and for both lunch periods, because they had 2 different lunch periods. So the PE teachers actually signed up on a rotation and filled in the days that the university students weren't there, because they saw the need and the value and how much the students really appreciated it. So again, this idea of changing a culture of a school. Lena, who was from Finland, said, well, we have this long recess when we can go to the gym. It's good, something extra that you can go exercise. And Jenna said, yes, during the exercise recess, you can go to the weight room or gym or play ping pong and use the air track. Something called an exercise recess exists in this school. Like, how cool is that? It's good that we have the ping pong tables. And so all throughout this school in Finland, so this is in the corridors, they have these ping pong tables, and before break time, somebody goes out and puts the ping pong rackets and a bunch of balls. They've actually now started making kids bring their own ping pong balls because they were losing so many of them. But there's like 10 tables in here. This was actually the entrance, the main entrance to the school is right here. So the first thing you see when you walk in the school is a ping pong table. Like, what? I was like, can I play? And they were everywhere. So any space that was in the school that had room to put a ping pong table, they put a ping pong table instead of, for example, a table or a bench or something like that. So that was really kind of neat to see. Marcus, who was a teacher in Finland, said, we have a special project, Finnish Schools on the Move. I don't remember, maybe 5 years or something. I think this project has had a big impact for the school. Maybe nowadays this effort is weakened a little bit. It's normal in this kind of project. In the beginning we had a very active students, but now it's not so active, but still more active than regular schools in Finland, I think. The most important thing is that we have built up many different facilities to be active. This is important, outdoors and indoors both. So the playground outside, the ping pong tables inside, these were all changes that were made as a result of that. And I think, you know, from a sustainability perspective, this program, by the time I had been in there, had been going on for 5 or 6 years. So the fact that a lot of these things were still maintained was a big success. This is a picture of the mini stadium I was talking about beforehand. Purposefully, if you're wondering why the facilities are always empty, I took the pictures when kids were in classes just because I couldn't really take pictures of kids to put in here. So that's why the facilities were empty. But during break times, there was, like, they were filled. This was the coolest thing I've ever seen. It's a 4-person ping pong table. So it's kind of like Foursquare, but on a ping pong table. And I mean, this was busy every break time. The kids were out there, and you could go across or to the side, and it was really kind of cool to see. I'd never seen anything like it before. So I had no idea what it was when I first saw it. My Finnish translator that was with me from Likas was like, oh, that's ping pong. I was like, it is? Okay, so, but again, this was a choice by the students. They wanted that in their yard. This is a really interesting picture, and we're nearly there, just in case you're wondering. But these were the school timetables for each of the schools that I visited. I'm going to show you a summary of them kind of to see, but you'll notice some different things kind of around the lengths of times and the amount of breaks and the actual length of the school day. So what this broke down to is the United States school day was 7 hours from the time kids started till they left at the end of the day, and they had approximately 1 hour and 25 minutes of break time. In Ireland, the school day was the shortest, but they also had the shortest amount of break time, so 6 hours and 20 minutes with 55 minutes of breaks. And then in Finland, the school day was 6 hours and 50 minutes with 1 hour and 45 minutes of that being break time. So that's the big difference. And if you look back at the Finnish timetable, their breaks, they purposefully, and they talked about this, the principal talked about this, and anecdotally when I was talking to the PE teacher, he talked to me about it. They purposely made the breaks long enough so that kids could actually do something, so that it wasn't just passing time. They wanted them to actually exercise. And so the exercise recess that one of the students referred to earlier was a break in the morning for 28 minutes. And students were actually not allowed to stay in the school for that 28 minutes. Only if they were in the sports wing with the sports hall or the gym. Otherwise they had to be outside, and they would actually send them out unless it was like, I can't remember what he told me that the temperature threshold was, but like they were actually like basically told you have to go outside. They locked the school building doors, and kids were outside for that time. Now, I know you're wondering, like, oh, like in your head you're probably thinking, oh, they're all out running around. A lot of them were standing around with their friends. But I did see especially a lot of girls, and this was common actually in the Ireland break times as well, doing laps of the school, chatting, right, gossiping with their friends, but being active because they were kind of forced into that scenario. The break times in the U.S. school, unfortunately, other than the long break at lunch, were really just passing time. So they were going from one side of campus to the other in between classes. But the real unique thing about the Finnish program, and you'll see, kids were never sitting for longer than 45 minutes. And that's kind of a policy thing or recommendation in Finland, and especially in this school, that after 45 minutes, the kids are either moving to another class or they have some type of break. That was a really neat thing to see. So while the nature and type of physical activity opportunities differed between the schools, partly because of that cultural piece, I mean in the United States, sports being the main thing, and here some school sports having, or some sports being at the school. In Finland, there are no school sports, it's all a club system, so there are not like school teams for kids to participate on, are interesting. But I'll let you guess which bike rack is which country. And this was one of about 6 similar spaces in the Finnish lower secondary school with bikes. So this was only one of them, and I took pictures of 3 or 4 others that had just as many or more, and you can't even actually describe like how much, and it's like this all year round. They all take the bicycles, and part of that is the infrastructure there was built for that. So cars are very expensive, like it's 100% tax or something on a car. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but so it's actually a better option to use a bicycle, and they've got bicycle lanes everywhere. This was obviously the school in Ireland, and I did find out from observing who was leaving these bikes that half of them were actually staff, not students, that were using them. And then this was in the United States, and actually this bicycle was there the entire time, so I don't think it was actually being ridden. Now, this school is in a neighborhood that's next to a major highway, so it wasn't like kids could really active transport, but this was an example of, for this school, if they made an initiative to be active transport, they would fail because they really didn't have those options. And so just thinking about your context and what is actually possible for you to do, I think is really important. So the conclusion basically is that successful school-based physical activity promotion is possible if there is a motivated physical activity champion in the school and if their promotion efforts are supported. You know, I don't think that any of these PE teachers that were highlighted in this could have done what they did if they were constantly battling against like unsupportive administration or other teachers in the school. And these schools created several physical activity opportunities for all students. And have developed strong physical activity culture. So these are things that were valued within each school. I really felt that, not just because I was in there asking about it, you could see it. I mean, when I was walking around the campuses and seeing the different posters and the different things that were available to kids, this was something that was really exciting for me, because I think we often kind of pretend, or I don't know, we have this idea that teenagers, high school kids, secondary school kids, that they don't want to be active, and in these schools we saw that when they were provided those opportunities, they were. And while it's not in here, the students in Finland actually talked about how they were kind of sad, like when they came to this lower secondary school, because it wasn't as cool to like play and do those things, and they were afraid of that. But at this school that it actually was, and that it was encouraged, and they were excited by that, because I don't know what we've done, but we've made this decision that as kids get older, they don't want to play, and we don't create those spaces for them. And I think these 3 schools that I visited are a really great example that that's actually not true, that kids of all ages, people of all ages, like they want to move and they want to be physically active, but we've created these spaces that don't really facilitate that. So it was nice to see these 3 schools, very different kind of in nature and context, but doing their part to make sure that kids had opportunities to be physically active. I do want to acknowledge the Society of Health and Physical Educators for the Early Career Researcher grant that I was provided some funding, and the Liikas Research Center in Jyväskylä, Finland, to facilitate me being in Finland, and my access to the school. And I actually had someone with me the whole time. Most of the interviews were conducted in English by me, but there was one group of students who were more comfortable speaking in Finnish, so he actually led the interview and then translated it for me. And then the University of Limerick International Education Division, I did receive some funding for my time in Ireland through the Erasmus Plus Teaching Mobility Program, so I actually taught a class for talk. So yeah, so anyways, that's that. Thank you so much.